Are you familiar with the early 1990s Russian Ponzi scheme scandal called MMM? I can't remember just this moment the name of the guy who orchestrated the whole thing. I think maybe Gulikov was his name. It was the first time that I'm aware of that former Soviet Russian investors really had the opportunity to get invested in something that was really abstract, and they could, in a egalitarian type of way, invest in something that could have huge returns. And for a while it worked. This was just really a classic Ponzi scheme, in that people were putting money in there with the promise of getting residuals from it as more and more people participated. And this morning at the youth hostel I was staying at, or I am still staying at, there are two Russian guests, and somehow in our discussions of economics and so on, it was mentioned, I made some joke about MMM, and it turns out 16, 17 years later, this guy really is making a comeback, as the guy of these two Russians is invested in it. And what made this case really tragic at that time is Russians were just so ill-prepared for this kind of financial instrument and what the pitfalls could be. Golikov hired a Mexican soap opera actress, Victoria Russo, to appear supportive of the project. And if you type in on YouTube MMM commercials, you can see a series of about 10 or 12 where you can get the gist of what the claims were. And one of the ones that she is in, she's reassuring this pregnant woman that yes, her money's safe and don't worry and all this other stuff. And it's my understanding that we'll never really know if it would have been successful, because the government stepped in and closed the offices down and then took semi-loads of cash out of the corporate offices in either Moscow or St. Petersburg. Anyway, this new friend of mine is having a pretty successful run with it this time, because he put in, I think it was $3,000, and not only got that in returns, but has been getting monthly dividends in pretty substantial amounts too. And there's this belief that what can you say, that it may overtake the ruble, given that people are wanting to be paid in this alternative currency, and yeah, it's almost like a fabled story in some way, because Golikov spent a few years in prison, and as late as last year, he was, I've seen interviews of him from the last 2 years where he's sitting in an office with a single file and a stapler and just not a penny to his name. And this hostel mate told me that just in the last few months, 20 million people have gotten involved again. it would seem apparent to me that ultimately this bubble will burst again. But I think that a lot of people are going to do okay, and maybe the losses won't be so catastrophic this time. But this Golikov got a way around this, that he's very unlikely to be shut down by the government because the investors have somehow it's really hard for me to describe with my limited education, but they have set up some kind of requirement where people get their security through the banks, and so the banks have their hands tied. They really cannot have this be shut down, and would pressure the government not to shut it down. And so if there's any kind of downward pressure on this, I wouldn't call it a stock. I guess it's some kind of, it's kind of like Forex trading, since it can be expressed through an alternative currency. But I don't know about this, and I got into kind of a heated discussion because, are you aware of high-frequency trading? This system is really sucking a pretty large amount of capital out of the system on a daily basis. And you could argue that yes, it's a more efficient way of trade and bringing the values down to what the actual demand is. But when it's being ruled by algorithms and non-human factors of speculation, I think that's human nature is erratic and emotional and dangerous, but I think that a totally digital response to every situation is not right either. And there was a newspaper article a couple of days ago from the LA Times that said that the algorithms are 99.9% accurate, but given that there are trades going on, millions of trades going on per minute, that's actually a very bad failure rate. So I don't know about this stuff. I don't blame people for making money through these